Hello.
Hi everyone. I know Yanesi's there. She told me she is, and we're doing this in parallel with Trusted Seeds. They're doing an Unconference.
Mm-hmm.
I center on a number of themes, and this particular theme is called engagement. So I was really excited to have you on because obviously I think storytelling is the most obvious way to engage people.
Yeah, I hope. I don't. Yeah, it could be. It's it's going to be an important element. I think you can't have a game anymore without wanting to say something. That's pretty much my byline. If you don't have something to say, you probably shouldn't make a game anymore. You'll be disappointed. You'll be upset. But the players will be disappointed because some people say, "Oh, I just want to play a game and I don't want to think about it. I want to." But if you're not at least trying to say something with that game, you're missing the point, I think, of what the medium's become, which is a big storytelling. Are we talking about games today? Or are we talking about life in general?
I think I was going to start with we'll start like basically women, and I'll guide you on this one.
Okay,
But it's
great.
going to be kind of a little bit of everything.
Please do. I tend to ramble, so.
No worries. Are you heading anywhere for the vacation, or are you staying in Paris?
I'm going to stay in Paris, except for 4 days where I'll go to Brussels. We have really good friends in Brussels, and New Year's in Brussels I found to be extremely fun. It's cold, and you want to stay inside with friends, which is kind of cool, except for midnight when you ring the bell or whatever. And then,
yeah.
But I like the coziness of Brussels, and I love cozy winters where you kind of stay inside and we go out and drink hot chocolate. Probably they have great chocolate in Belgium as well. But I like Brussels.
I'm a big fan of hot chocolate. Okay, I guess we can technically begin. Okay, welcome everybody to the first episode of Thoughtful Thinkers, and it's the title "Once Upon a Time and Other Tales." And I'm here with Kurt McClung, who will introduce himself. And a big thank you to Aburra and the entire team for letting me use this platform. And we're doing this in conjunction with Trusted Seed for their Unconference, and the topic is engagement. So I thought storytelling was a perfect fit, and I have the perfect person here in Kurt. I'm going to start with a quote, and I asked Kurt then to take it from there. The quote is, "I'm obsessed with giving the audience something they don't see coming." It's by Jordan Peele. When you hear that, I would love to, Kurt, for you to tell your story based on that quote, and then we can kind of just dive into a lot of things that you're involved in and how you got into storytelling.
Yeah, well, it's a really beautiful quote. I quite like it. Thanks for opening with that. It kind of, the first thing that comes to mind is my life. I say at least my professional life, because I didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming at all. I grew up in Indiana, and I love games, role-playing games, the Dungeons and Dragons style when I was a kid, but it was basically kind of outlawed at the time in my Indiana community. They were literally burning Dungeons and Dragons books because of the Satanism inside of them. So I grew up in a pretty conservative area. My family was open-minded, but the area was pretty conservative. I went to Purdue University because being a writer at the time was considered to be just next to social and financial suicide in the Midwest. So I went to be an engineer because I had good math skills, and I learned to be an industrial engineer in simulation and project management, but I hated it. I did a few internships, and I took a plane by pure chance. It was a surprise. Again, surprises me. Didn't see it coming. I was working in a restaurant, and I met a French girl, and she invited me to France, and I've been in France now for 35 years. And it's been quite the adventure. That was the first big twist. I worked as an engineer at Disneyland doing the park when it was opened up back in the day. And on the side, though, pretty quickly, I launched my own role-playing game company, which was easier to do in France for some strange reason than it was in Indiana. So I created role-playing games in the paper-type variety in a very cool French market. But that was my hobby. I did that for 5 years, working as an engineer by day and working as an entrepreneur by night. Then I had an opportunity, which is kind of going to set up the rest of, I guess, my storytelling adventure. I got a license to do a play-by-mail game, which no one knows. You'd have to be really, really, really I don't know, none of the young generations know this day. They used to play role-playing games. So you could play games by mail. Like literally, people would create a party of characters like you would in a Baldur's Gate today or something, and then you would send your orders to me by mail, 15 orders, and then I would put them in this computer, and the computer would print out 5 pieces of paper, and I would send it back to you by mail. This is before internet. This is before.
Oh, wow. I've done chess by mail, but not that.
Yes. Well, then you got it. Just imagine chess by mail. So I had one game that was an MMORPG by mail. We had 2,000 players in the game. Another game was a Fortnite-like battle royale. We had 100 players in the game, all fighting to be the last one surviving, called Survivor 1. And these were done by mail before they became typical computer games. But we were working back then on those. And what I discovered pretty quickly after about a year of doing that, we had 2,000 clients. It was a budding industry that was killed by internet when the internet finally came out. But we understood pretty quickly that the stories that were being told weren't necessarily coming from our computer program and our game. They were coming from the community that was writing letters to each other. And meeting in cafes, because they had 10 days between 2 turns, right? Like 10 days between. So they would call each other up and they would write stuff, and they were creating all this content, all these stories on the side. And I eventually said, listen, we're going to make a book out of it. And we're going to put this book in shops, and we're going to take this content that they're creating and turn it into kind of like a reference manual, like a role-playing game reference manual. And I hired a guy, Erwin Le Breton, to help me do this. And he got all their fanzines and started meeting them. And we put together this supplement. And then pretty much that industry died in a heartbeat. The minute you had internet, there were games readily available. No one wanted to wait 10 days to play a CRPG. You had Baldur's Gate, you had these other computer games coming out, and you had different ways of playing it. But I learned quite a bit about that. I learned a couple things that I've probably taken me where I am today. One is that your community develops its own story if you give them enough lore and information and a context to do that. And so that went on. So I went from there. I continued to be an engineer for a while until I was able to get out of it. And I joined a company to create paper games as well, called the Humanoids Associate, which is a comic book house in France. And they had me work with Jodorowsky and Moebius to put together a paper game at the time on the Incal and the Metabarons, which is a pretty big sci-fi IP here in France. And that from there, I ended up turning that into a role-playing game. The idea was to make a computer game out of it. And for long story short, that guy, Erwin, who I had hired to help me do the content book on Quest, he called me from Ubisoft, said, hey, we're doing a reboot of Might and Magic. I like the stuff you did in the games. And I also like I'd written a comic book with dragons and stuff for Humano. And he goes, why don't you come work for Ubisoft and help us reboot the world of Might and Magic? And so I went, sure. I loved Might and Magic. So I went over there and I did that for 5 years. I was the lead writer of all their games, Might and Magic related, and it was a great experience. Worked with some great people, other writers. I learned a lot from the people on board there, and that was all surprises after surprises after surprises. I never thought I would go into video games. I never even thought I would be a writer, but I actually I didn't think it was even possible. But by the time I came out of that, here I was writing for Ubisoft, writing a major video game for them. Heroes of Might and Magic was a pretty big game for us. That went on to me specializing in video game writing. And now today I've written over 50 games for at least 20 studios as a specialist in world doctoring, script doctoring, lead writing, world design. And that's pretty much been my career. It was kind of that's who you have in front of you today. I think the title would be narrative designer or narrative content creator or something like that. But I'm a specialist, I guess you'd say, and I've loved it ever since. So I guess the full circle would be since I was 13, I loved role-playing games. It was hard to play them, and now I'm making them in the digital variety for a dozen major studios in France and Germany and America and China. that's what I do.
Do you think that at the core of human beings that storytelling is what keeps us going? I mean, you talk about oral history has always passed that way. Common law is passed by oral history. There's a question from Jordan, and he asked if you played Baldur's Gate 3. Yeah. And how would you say that? I mean, you and I talked about the Xerox store. I think that would be a great way to show how community drives everything.
Yeah, I will get to that Baldur's Gate because I actually have a studio that I created that's making a CRPG like Baldur's Gate. We don't have near the amount of money that Baldur's Gate does, but it is our spiritual reference. I think, yeah, when I was doing my stories and games, for a while I was looking for a way to make money, and there was a transition. The transition came from me being a project management engineer, basically, where I was helping stories. I was telling stories about which buildings we could build with Bouygues and SPIE and all these big companies, by giving them a schedule and then writing the story. We can make this building happen. So I realized I was just telling a story about what that project could be like, and I was getting stories from other people saying, "Well, no, that schedule's not going to work. You haven't taken into consideration this because once upon a time I was in Africa and we tried to do it and it didn't work, and then I was in Asia." All these people were giving me these stories, so I started realizing that. I started looking around, and I picked up a book from Stephen Denning and John C.D. Brown. There were two different people at the time that were working on. The good way to think of it would be like John C.D. Brown was hired by Xerox. That's the story you're looking at. He was hired by Xerox to solve their problem with their repairmen in their company, because they had all these photocopies that this is like in the 70s, and this is at the time Palo Alto was their big kind of think tank, their brainstorm city that they're spending all this crazy money on to try to come up with new ideas. And they basically had fire. They had invented fire. They had invented the next singularity, the photocopy machine at the time. And they're making more money than they knew what to do with. But the problem was these machines were pretty expensive and they were pretty hard to fix. So they would send engineers in to repair them whenever they broke down, which was costing them a fortune. And they were making these manuals that were 600 pages long, these huge manuals. People were supposed to read them and then they couldn't fix it.
Oh, I think we lost Kurt. I think he's got to log back in. Oh, no. Hold on. So that is a technical issue. I don't know, bling, bling. What happened? I'm going to text Kurt. Hold on for a second. Hi, Bling Bling. Do you know if I lost Kurt with the link? You have any idea? Because I don't see him here. Okay, well, I think Kurt will come back. There must have something technically happened. The question was from Jordan, which he was explaining for a real-life application. And it ties into what Kurt was going on about, is that Xerox is trying to solve this notion of how to repair our machines. And a community came out of the repairmen. And I guess they met every morning over coffee, and then at the end of the day, and exchange war stories. And due to these war stories is how the best repair people came up with the ideas and the solutions. And from that became a community. I'm going to try to reach Kurt, because something must have happened. I don't know if it's a dead battery on his desktop or if he got kicked off. So hold on for a second, folks. Okay, Kurt is coming back. I guess he was talking and he didn't realize he got cut off. So he must have, I don't know what he did, must have jumped out for some reason. But he will be back. If you have any questions, If you're part of the Trusted Steed Unconference, if you can please send them to Yanesi, that would be great, and then I can ask Kurt. Obviously, and I think Jordan, do you have any more questions, Jordan? And Bling Bling, Jordan says he's not able to write any cast ask questions. So I'm not sure if we can look into that, if that's a possibility. But Kurt should be back in about 30 seconds. Hi, Bling Bling. Jordan, you want to try to write in the cast part? Because I can see Bling Bling is writing hi.
Hello, am I back?
You're back.
Oh,
Perfect.
sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
No worries. No worries. We're all in tech. We understand. It happens.
What did you leave me rambling?
That you were talking about Xerox and the repairman and all the big documentation. Yeah.
Sure. So probably so these repairmen, they'd created this knowledge database of war stories that were helping people like understand how to fix each other's problems, and it was generating heroes of the repairman industry, right? This was the first known war story database or knowledge database of pragmatic solutions, which again you find on YouTube everywhere for everything today. But at the time, it wasn't shared information, and no one even realized. Everyone was more about, we've got a problem, we're going to document it, we're going to create a manual that fixes it. This was more like, we just need to get people talking to each other, communicating, and then we can solve problems much more quickly if we access the knowledge that's in people's brains. That was the basic idea of war story database communication. It was more connectivity and having them write down these stories of how they were solving problems. To go back to what you were suggesting, the first story that people tell is a story that helps them solve a problem. It's like, if you think about it, if you hear someone talking in the street, and if they're just talking about the weather, you don't really tune into it. But if you hear someone arguing with someone about, that's not the way you do it, or this is what you do, your attention immediately is drawn to it. Yeah, totally, right? You're gonna, because there's a problem there, and you could say maybe it's a voyeurism kind of thing, but it's not. It's a natural reflex we have. If they've got a problem, that interests me because I might have that same problem someday, and I want to solve it. When I write fiction, when anyone writes fiction, not just me, we really only have three kinds of scenes we write. We write scenes of seduction. We write scenes of what we call, I'm going to throw violence out the window for now. We write scenes of intimidation, or someone's trying to intimidate someone, or someone's trying to seduce someone. Is more like, it could even be a child trying to say to their parent, oh, please do this for me, because there's no logic involved. And then we have what we call negotiation scenes, where you're trying to convince someone that this is the right thing to do. Any other scene's boring. Literally boring. You will turn off the television, right?
Yeah.
Unless it's a chase or violence or somebody killing each other, whatever, or fighting, whatever. So
a different dopamine.
Totally different dopamine. Those other three kinds of dialogue, what we call dialogue scenes in video games. The reason, and sometimes it feels a little formulaic, but if I give you a video game scene where I just start spilling out a bunch of information and then you have to go do something cool, most people skip the scene. Because you have a skip button right now in video games where you can skip the whole scene and just go to the action. Well, that's not the way we try to write. It's this, between the war stories where we're sharing solutions and the other stories where we're trying to learn how to deal with human interaction, how people deal and how people get what they want, right? How do you get what you want? Storytelling's been around since humankind invented language, It's just
Exactly. Yep. It's in our DNA.
Yeah, it's in our DNA. You got to know. People call it spin today, I suppose, when you're trying to pitch your project or sell your project. But in the end, it's basically people will listen to you telling. The reason we use stories is because these stories normally relate situations that are useful to you. They help you. You can at least say, this is a problem that I might have had. This is a problem that I could get solved from one way or another. So the nonfiction stories are, how do I cook a shrimp omelet, and not burn it or something. You can get that on YouTube. That's a story. Someone's going to give you the story of how to do it. But the story that you would listen to more quickly if it wasn't a recipe would be like, how did I burn my omelet, the Christmas Eve, that's like all of a sudden it's got drama involved, right? I gotta do something. I burned my turkey. I had to make an omelet instead, so all of a sudden we're like, whoa, yeah, you can relate to it. Whether you're doing a video game or not, or whether you're doing even telling a presentation at work, the more you put into that, this idea that, hey, I'm going to tell you a story about how we succeed, or I'm going to tell you a story why you need what I'm giving you. And I'm going to make that relatable to you as a human being. Now you're there. That's what I do. That's my job on a daily basis. And every game I create, we go through and we map out that story or those stories that are going to build engagement. And the engagement only comes if I think it's useful to me. That's the only reason I'll listen to you. Now, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much what it is. The other part of the business is having something to say. That's having something to share that feels true and rings true. It rings like something that you want to share with someone because you think it's going to be valuable for their life. And it can.
When we talked about the Xerox, you had talked about how the stories of them sharing really helped all these repair people around the world. And
Totally.
And you said that Xerox tried to interfere with it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. That's probably the part I was explaining why the thing got cut. It's the basic of it. They created this peer community, this knowledge database of these repairmen who were sharing. Hey, I fixed the X37 machine by giving it a kick in the drawer, or I fixed this one by cleaning with olive oil this gear. Whatever. They had all these really strange stories about how they'd fix things that were very pragmatic. And some of them were stars because some machines that no one knew how to fix them. They couldn't get this repaired. And all of a sudden they had these heroes popping up. Oh, you solved that way. How clever. And then they had this peer network. So then Xerox said, let's pay people for the best stories. This is working so well. We've reduced costs. Our customer satisfaction is going out the roof, right? And so they said, let's incentivize this. And the community of repairmen said, no, if you're not bringing money into this situation, we do not want money incentives in here and messing things up. This is our place. This is our home. This is our content, right? This is our world, and we want to keep it free and in between each other because we don't want anything weird coming in where people start sharing information to make money. We want it just to be our zone so we can do our job. You're already paying us a salary, right? We don't need it. And that's something that you find in game communities as well. When we set up we don't set up a Discord. Like if you're making a game and you want to build a community, you let the community set up the Discord.
Yeah,
it's earned community behavior, right? You earn this marketing whatever. It's their place. The minute we start trying to moderate that, we get into a weird ground where people start moralizing, or we're taking on responsibilities. We don't really. The Discord communities will police themselves. Now you can have a place. You can go to the Discord community and talk with them when they have questions and things. That you can become a member of it. Like the VIP member that's in charge of giving the official data. But you'll find out that there's communities you can build by putting money into them, time and energy. And then there's communities that you earn because you've made such a good game, or you've given a promise that your game's going to be great, and they're curious about it and they build it. It's the same principle as this peer group for the war stories that was set up by Xerox. They learn quite simply. What happens is when you start putting money into the equations, when you start trying to manipulate your community, and you're not obvious about it, you're not telling them what you're trying to do, you create really bad vibes.
Yeah.
Really press.
I see that Epic has leveraged a lot of their best, I guess, users of UE5 to evangelists. And the people I talk to who are the evangelists for Epic Games really know their stuff, but they are obsessed with the game engine. And they do stuff for free, and I'm just like, wow. And it's just a different vibe. It's crazy that money is the currency we do, like, so much of our things. But my daughter, when she was very young, said, why do we have to pay for food? Is that something we all can have? And I was just like, yeah, you're probably right. But it's one of those, I wonder how, and we talked about like Web3 and what your thoughts on that, where the community can really drive and it's a true understanding of what democracy could look like.
It's something that's always fascinated me. Web3. I had a real ton of hope for Web3 when it was starting to come out of it. Right. I mean, because of John Seeley Brown and even Stephen Denning, who was big on knowledge, turning the World Bank into a knowledge bank rather than a money bank. Right. This idea that we could share knowledge and share information and share it freely to make the world a better place to live in. That was one angle I really liked. The other was inventing new forms of democracy and new forms of government. I guess it kind of joined the anarchist movements with the philosophers like Hakim Bey and those guys that are a little controversial because they're quite strange. But this idea of temporary autonomous zones where you go out and we could forge these new worlds because we were out of the constraints of normal society, and we could build new places. It was like this Wild West Web3, where there were no laws other than our value systems, our personal value systems, right? And you could just say, okay, what if we gave everybody the right to vote, right? No matter if they're 1 year old or if they're 90 years old, anyone coming, you had all kinds of different possibilities. What if we give you the right to vote in function of the number of hours you spend in this place? There are just tons of different things. Those are just simple ideas, but there were tons of ideas that could be invented by communities because they weren't constrained by their nationality or their sex or their race or their sexual preference. So Web3 was a place where we could reinvent models that we could take back and learn from, and maybe keep this planet from boiling over.
Right.
I was so excited about that. And I go, wow, okay, cool. And so I invested a lot of time in it, and I followed the blockchain, NFT. I followed all the different movements, and then there just became this shadow of speculation that's where people were starting to bank more on what it could be financially rather than what they wanted it to be or what we were looking for. And I see today a hope with AI that maybe that what do we want to do? What do we want to make? What do we want to say? We'll come back to it. I'm really hoping for that. If it does come back, it'll come back from the communities.
Yes. Yeah.
People that aren't motivated by money, they're motivated by making this world a better place for everybody. I think you tapped into it. I mean, the Epic community, even the Unity community is the same. They've got very, very open, all the open source.
They all do. Yeah.
From Mozilla they always gave us this idea that was really hard to understand. When we start saying it's open, what's that mean? Even D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, they created an open system so people could create content. All the worlds that have been created on Dungeons and Dragons paper games is amazing. There's just like thousands and thousands of worlds. And for me, each world is a new form of utopia, a Thomas More style utopia, or a dystopia, but let's imagine a world where things are different. Whether it's got elves and dwarves and dragons in it doesn't really matter because those are just metaphors.
Yeah,
right? I mean, those are just metaphors. In the end, it's like what could we do to make these better worlds happen? And Web3's got a possibility. Web3 is just basically giving more tools to people so they can express their ideas. They can express they can build these worlds. These metaphors, these different places where we can talk and play together and develop communities that start adhering to a new philosophy or a new way of looking at the way the way resources should be divvied up, the way we can save our planet from being polluted to death, or how are we going to treat each other, how are we going to accept each other? Give me a metaphor that explains and shows truly and really the power of diversity, which is obvious for me, with all the stories I've written, that diversity is the strength and rich wealth of our planet. But it's sometimes you need to see it in a game or in an illustration to get it.
Where you don't have all the constraints of things that you've been socialized on.
Yeah, there's a question here from Jordan. Is that it?
Yeah. Do you see the question? I think you touched on it, but do you want to go deeper into that?
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, I'll take a step in. Right, we've seen a lot of things. Where there's this idea of speculation. I mean, I'm shown projects from Web3 that, well, basically there was a big time when people were creating images and hoping those images would be worlds, and just creating thousands of images and then selling them as NFT and minting them, as they used to say back then, right? And then I get these people coming into me with 1,000 monkeys or 1,000 whatever, and I won't even tell you all the stuff I've seen. And they say, okay, we want to make an IP out of this. We want to make a CRPG. We want to make a shooter. We want to make something. I'm sorry, I can't. We can't do anything right now because I don't. Tell me what you wanted to say when you created these images. What was the context? What was the metaphor? What world problem were you addressing? What memory of childhood are you coming at? So we have all these questions about what they're actually trying to say, and in most cases, because they were just trying to make money, or they were being paid to illustrate something. I can't find the person that had something to say at the beginning, because there was a total misunderstanding of what a cultural medium is. Web3 is not a cultural medium. Games are.
Yeah.
Web3 is a tool to create games. Games are a cultural art form that you can make stuff to share your feelings, to share your adventure, to share your life, to share what you believe is the future of humanity. Web3 is the future of humanity. For me, that's the difference. It's where it's this great technology that's going to allow us to share amazing ideas together. But you can't create lore that's just lore that's going to build engagement. You literally have to say to yourself, okay, why are people going to come and hang out in the lore world I've built? Why are we going to engage in that? You can't get ChatGPT to do it, in spite of what everybody thinks about it. It's a couple
of humans. It's a poor ripoff of something that's already been done.
Totally, and it'll feel that way, and people will know it and they'll recognize it. But if you went to let's just take a random idea. I couldn't get tickets for the Taylor Swift concert, even though I was really hoping to. I'm a huge fan of Taylor Swift, and all of her songs, every verse, there is a real memory that she writes. That's what brings us into her world, because she's sharing real memories. Video games are the same way. So are poems, so are books, so are movies.
Yeah.
Totally. There's real memories that are translated into these mediums, and a real memory resonates with people more than anything you else can do. It's the first story, right? It's the first story. It's the story of, do you remember when I had that first breakfast you had when you were a child? I remember my first breakfast, taking my brother and sister when they were only like 4 and 6, and I was 8, and it was after a party, and the parents were probably sleeping it off, and I was there giving them cereal, and I felt so proud to be their big brother, and it was just a memory that comes back to me. If I ask you your first breakfast memory, you can go back. What's my oldest memory? You'll have a different memory than I will, and everybody that's listening to us will have a different memory. But when
you said that, I was thinking of Ratatouille. The movie.
Yeah, totally. Yes. It's exactly a great idea. When he remembers that Ratatouille is eating as a child, in that monumental scene, right?
Yeah.
Well, what links us together, the anchor, is breakfast.
Yeah.
Breakfast as a child. So, as human beings, we all have this first breakfast memory, right? We all have our first kiss. We all have our first heartbreak. We all have our first treason when somebody lied to us or something. These are things that movies and other things do really well, but you need to seed it with a real memory. Otherwise, it's no longer a real memory that is someone's working on the project, not just someone you pull out of whatever. But it's something. Otherwise, it doesn't ever ring true. It sounds like a kind of fake thing.
I hear what you're saying, because we have a daughter, and I didn't. When you explain something to a child, it isn't until they go through it you see their face. And so I've obviously been to a funeral. I've lost animals, whatnot. And our dog died last summer. Oh, and her reaction to it, because it's never happened, and she grew up with this particular dog, and was strong, and she's still having a really hard time. I know that she has never seen anything like that, even in our life, and we just lost a relative. So it's interesting to see her go through that when you've done it a few times in your lifetime, when you get to a certain age, obviously, because it's such a different perspective to see how people process that, especially
Yeah,
if they're close to.
and you just illustrated 2 points. You've illustrated her memory of this
Mhm.
moment, how she could write a game or a story or tell us something and it would touch us because it's real, right? She's going to talk
Yeah.
about losing the dog and then maybe losing her other. And then we've got your memory of you seeing her go through it and how hard it was for you as a mother. So these two memories can be real. Just what you shared with us all here on the little podcast, we're all feeling it. And normally the fact you talk about seeing a child lose someone, if you've seen that before in your life, I was immediately drawn to my son and his 2 goldfish that we bought and died the next day, and we had to go out and bury them in the backyard. Right? He was so sad. He'd only had them for 2 days, but he was so sad. These poor goldfish. I feel bad about that today, but I felt worse about him having to go through that 2 goldfish. Right? So we've just connected on that level, even though our stories are quite different. These stories resonate, and this is the key to Web3.
Yeah.
It's like if you can create these anchors across your content where they can hear 2 stories, 3 stories, 4 stories that are connected through a real, true, meaningful memory, you've got the beginning of what I call a community. What our business, when you're working on things like Baldur's Gate 3, I didn't work on Baldur's Gate 3, but I've worked on a lot of games. One of our first things we're trying to do is to create memories that people can share.
Yeah.
We're creating games where they're going to go through this, like you're going to be in front of there's this old woman that you have to kill in the corner because she's actually hiding a child below. There's all these memories that they've created in Baldur's Gate 3 that people share. They come to work and how did you solve that problem? What did you do? Oh, I did this. And even though they can play differently and have a different experience, they have an anchor, which is they know where that was, right? You can take any video game that's good, The Last of Us, even GTA or something, which I find amazing. People remember certain scenes and certain moments so strongly because they're interacting physically with them. They're changing the story subtly as they go through it, or they're living the story, so to speak. But the real important thing is when they share those memories with people outside of their own individual experience. So they can either do that on the web, or they can do that at home, or they can do that at work, or they can do that in your Discord forum, but these moments bring them together and they're creating shared memories.
And do you think those shared memories for a game or whatever medium it is, it's because it's also shared within a community that discusses it and they bond over it? That makes it experience.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They bond over it. They bond over it, and then what will often happen is they'll even create fan fiction. They'll even create other stories. They'll take different things, and then because they've linked onto something, and people they start creating their own content.
We're big fans of Star Wars fan fiction. I'm like,
love. I worked on one of my companies before we bought out West End Games, which was a RPG house that was doing the tabletop version of Star Wars RPG, and they'd worked 20 years between the 2 film series. The first 3 in the 70s, and then the next one's 20 years later.
Yeah,
and they created 400 books of content. That was the equivalent of fan fiction in a way because it was just different fans, and all that stuff they were creating was just it was just their love and passion for the fantasy that Lucas had created. Right, he sparked this epic journey, and in that, you're way too young to remember this, but at the time we didn't have fun, adventurous movies in the 70s in America. We had very sad and serious movies. We had they were very sad and scary, and they were intellectual. But now we had really, really cool movies. Star Wars, Rocky. You had I'm using the French word "Don de la Mer," Jaws. You had the Jaws movie. It was all part of something. All of a sudden, things were getting fun again and more infantile or child. But we could start if anyone who's seen Jaws in a movie theater has a shared memory. Like I think I probably watched 10% of that movie. I had my head in a bag, But even that, I can share that with people, and they get it. What cultural art does is it creates moments of shared experience that you can repeat that in your brain. If we all go to see the Mona Lisa, we've all seen the Mona Lisa, right?
Yeah.
If you've heard a Taylor Swift song or a Billie Eilish song, or you've seen a Clint Eastwood movie, or you can talk about these, and this brings us closer together. Art brings us together. It doesn't separate us. It doesn't individualize us. Communities are not made to be. I know a lot of people think of them as niche communities or communities that are there. And a community is never closed. It's always open to bring in more people. It's always ready to bring in more people. They just need to have some sort of value proposition that's literally a value, not a value in financial, but some sort of human value, right? Whether it's nostalgia for these children that are losing their puppies and stuff, or their goldfish, right?
That would be a great group.
Yeah, I can imagine we talk about it. But people have those for people who lost their dogs in video games.
Yeah. Oh, really? For their video games?
Yeah. You can lose a dog in a video game. I'm trying to think of one off the head, but somebody will give you an example. Do
you think there's an emotion so obviously you've been doing this for some time and you understand storytelling, which way our brain goes. Do we veer? I taught psychology and done a number of courses in sociology, and so the academics do believe that we're geared to the negative. But I'm wondering, when it comes to storytelling and songs, is there an emotion that always hits versus another? Because I know people go to violence, but is there something that it resonates with everyone the easiest?
I think what people don't understand, and the stories understand better, is that what you're talking about are musical notes in the story, right? The negative, the positive, negative. Stories have both. There's no if you've ever seen a romantic comedy, you've seen Sleepless in Seattle, probably. They are so structured. These things, you might not realize it, but these are every story is told is structured. But there's always the fight at the beginning between the couple that is going to get together, right? It's like a real negative moment. They hate each other. Why do you can't do that? Yeah. Whether it's when Harry met Sally, whatever. There's always this argument, and then we kind of see that as fate telling us, "Oh, these guys are getting together." I mean, you've had that, right?
Yeah, of course.
So that's a negative moment, right? When two people are fighting, but we enjoy it, we love it, right?
Yeah.
There's also the moments in a tragic film when the hero had a chance to save everybody, but he turned it down. He could have done the right thing, but he didn't. That's like a dark comedy or dark drama, right? A thriller.
Yeah, the anti-hero. Yep.
The hero kind of thing, and the tragedy. That's kind of like in the Godfather when at the end Al Pacino is Yeah, but that's that was a tragic moment, normally I think the guy didn't intend it to be a tragedy. It became a heroic adventure movie for a lot of Americans who wanted to celebrate mafia life. But I think the guy basically became the devil.
Yeah. They did do that play where it's like every time he was in a church, there was murder happening. I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
Well, it's an interesting parallel because when you look at it, so you can say people are attracted to negative. No, they're attracted to negative situations where the problems are solved or unsolved, right? So like you look at all the crime films on television, all this stuff, all the crime stories, crime movies,
serial killers.
Yeah, they get the people in the end. So it's all this horror, and then justice comes in and saves the day. In most American things, in most French things, because what it is there's this ongoing idea that we all believe, I think fundamentally, that there is justice in this world. That even if we have horrible criminals, we'll eventually catch them, right?
Yeah.
There are movies where it doesn't. It ends really tragically, right? And everybody dies, right? So that's another thing. But even in the Star Wars Rogue One, everybody dies, but they get the piece of information off and they save lives, right? Their sacrifices is
worth it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I think when we say people are attracted to the negative, that's really misunderstanding how human stories are told. If you do that, what you're doing is you're basically doing what I consider to be kind of unethical, which is you're basically getting people hooked to the hook, to the thing that's brought them to you, right? But you're not giving them a solution that's gonna go with it, which is usually the happy ending or the tragic ending. If you just give them the oh my God, somebody got shot. Oh my God, it's raining fire in Hawaii. Oh my God, you just keep doing this, and this. You'll get them to look at it, and they may even get addicted to those curious moments where their curiosity is spiked, and they get this wow, my eyes are open really wide, and they may watch your TikTok thing 1,000 hours in a row, whatever. But they're not getting what they need as human beings, which is a complete story, a story that twist, a negative side, a good side, a positive side, characters, because that's what we love more than anything is our stories. We're telling them more quickly and more quickly. We're more in a shorter.
But But I think that even good startups start that way. There's a story that's presented like with Uber. You couldn't get a taxi cab in Paris.
Right.
And that's why I came with Uber, which is the story that many people who travel or have been specifically to Paris understand that when there were only taxis. And people who join startups want to solve that or are in Web3 or Web2 feel that there's a problem.
Probably right. But if you look at Uber, that's a really good example for me.
Yeah.
This is I don't have any statistics to base this, other than the fact that I take a lot of Ubers in every country in the world, and especially in the countries where I don't trust the taxis.
Yeah.
It's that I don't have to trust them. The system protects me from that.
Yeah.
So like I don't have to worry about them ripping me off, because it's and if you've traveled at all in a lot of countries, you really are afraid to trust taxis, other than Singapore, which I trust every taxi driver in Singapore. They're absolutely amazing. Yeah. But it's part of their national pride to be good taxi drivers in Singapore.
Right, you said they were all former police officers, right?
Yeah, like former police officers, like half the taxi force. But they have there's something about the Uber though that made it so that they actually created communities. I actually take the group rides now quite a bit just to talk to people in the Uber. They've turned my taxi ride into a bus ride, where we're allowed to talk. I
can see that.
And so that story changes, right? So you're part of the community. You're part of the Uber community, or the Bolt community, or whatever you are. They're selling you something different. They're selling you a community way of traveling around. You know the driver, you give him stars, whatever, but it's not. You can tip him, of course, but tip her or him. But the real thing they're giving for me is their story has evolved. You couldn't find a taxi now. It's like, hey, I can turn this moment into something that's actually less stressful.
Yes. Very convenient. Yeah, easy.
If we're stuck in a traffic jam, we're both upset. Him and me, right? Her and me, right?
Yeah.
If we're stuck but we're on the same side now. We're not like
fighting each other.
Yeah. And there's not a win-lose situation ever in an Uber. You know what I mean? It's like either win-win or lose-lose, but it's never win-lose. You're making money because it's waiting, and I'm losing money because this trip's taking way too long or whatever. That's something Uber did. I think it just kind of happened. So yeah, if you look at, I'm reading here, if you look at the more people spend time in a game, the more they are emotionally involved.
Yeah.
It's true. These shared memories are they're emotionally involved, and you tend to remember something more when you do it, because not everyone's just a visual intellectual learner.
Repetition.
Some people need to move their fingers, some people need to dance, some people and in a video game you're actually actively participating. So it's quite interesting. I think one of the things that Web3 might have been doing wrong, and this is kind of in the question that's being going, is there was a value proposition that was financial in certain games, basically like treating them like farmers, right? Like, we're going to go out there and build this world, and everyone's going to make money, and this is the new El Dorado, and then we're going to get rich people to come in that want the stuff, and they're going to pay you because you made it for them. That's just the real world, you know what I mean? Like it's not how games. It's not the game world that I wanted to create. Yeah. That's like saying, hey, we're gonna. Well, I've seen it. We can get into a long discussion on that, but if you want to build a place, here, every single thing that was ever done, it was exactly like you're saying with Uber at the beginning. It was a generous proposition. It wasn't. It was something that made your life easier, or made your life more meaningful. It made your life, or it gave you a possibility to share and learn and get excited about something. Either it inspired you, or it made your life, it cared for you in some way or another. So it's a generous proposition, right? It's generous to inspire someone. It's generous to care for someone, and anything you create, getting one person from one place to another, giving them good food, giving them a good game experience where they can feel more powerful and feel good about themselves. You're doing something good for them. That's what everything is. That's what everything is. Forget Web3. That's what, the physical world is. Building a building so you don't get cold and you can get out of the rain. Everything we do creates, when we say creates value, it's value to the human being that's going to be using it, right? It's not just creating value in terms of money. And I think what's really scary about the metaphor of Web3 is that I think it's the first time in human existence we can confuse very quickly values and value, and we can turn Web3 into money. It's like the Bitcoin did some really cool things, but also created a metaphor that's really hard for people to separate from. I'll just create something that creates this value that's in a Bitcoin, and then that means everything that I create has value. No, everything you create can make someone's life better, has value. Mm-hmm. But somebody, if you just create to create it, you're speculating.
You're speculating.
Yeah, maybe it'll have value because somebody else will want it. But it's you need to understand that's what it is. And honestly, there is no better place on the planet right now to create value in a world that's trying to communicate with each other at a gazillion kilometers away, maybe on Mars someday, I don't know, than a Web3 environment. I can make friends. I can be around. I can make this world a safer place to live in because I'm going to get to know you better, and I'm going to have a less desire to go to war with you, or to steal from you, or whatever. Most of the problems we have today, or I'm going to have less desire to pollute in my part of the world, or your part of the world, because I know this is just one planet we're living on, and we have no planet B. We just have one planet. So all these things we're creating, these cultural communicative platforms, have value, and they can be used to make this place a more fun, better, safer, greener place to live on, if we realize that's what their main goal is to do, is to bring us together through our differences and our different shared experiences and our emotions and our memories. It just makes you like people more. You're going to love people all over the world, and you haven't even met them because you've heard their stories, you've shared their stories, you've shared their experiences. You've all played Baldur's Gate 3, or you've all played The Last of Us, or you've all played a really cool game on that you helped build. If you get to the next part, the idea of buildings like in Minecraft or in Roblox or even Fortnite, they're starting to have some sustainable models on Fortnite platforms. You've got these people creating content, but they're not creating it to make money to start with. They're creating it to share something, to express themselves, to share their vision of what a beautiful house would look like, or their vision of what a fun experience would be together. Let's tell my story. Or they might even build their grandfather's home that's been destroyed, and they're trying to remember it. Whatever. All these things are kind of what I think. If you can kind of get your head around that, you understand what storytelling is in any cultural medium, and how powerful it can be. If you don't just try to provoke someone's emotions, because that we can do, right? We can do it over and over again.
It's why I asked that question. I wonder. I mean, I've seen a lot of games, and I've worked with teachers, and we discussed like some games. You wonder if they're built to provoke certain things from a certain subset, like of kids, to get them to like detach. And I wonder how dangerous. And we talk about the algorithms and all those things. Like, what is the thinking behind that? I think there is, because there's a lack of storytelling and there's more speculation, and that's a Web 2, genre I'm referring to. Like this part of gaming, which is, it can be very violent, and kids flock to it.
Yeah, it's even probably what we call there's all kinds of games, right? I call them the Twitch adrenaline games, right? Building up your adrenaline. There have been some great studies on how we have to really be more responsible when we're doing Twitch games, adrenaline-based games, or monetize. There's two big fears. One is, there's three today, and I think TikTok's shown us how dangerous the other one can be too. There's three drug-like related or addictive tendency related phenomena that happens when the human being interacts with the game. One of them is, some of them are healthy, but the ones that are kind of negative is the Twitch, like you're talking. It's not so much the parents, it's the immediacy of doing something now. Take it. I'm just doing something. And you can play with the lights. I've played Call of Duty, and you get into these zones where hours go by and you're being stimulated. Your brain's being stimulated. You feel alive with this because it's just really going into your adrenaline. A dose of that can be healthy, but it can be addictive. We've proven it. We don't give you time to think. You just do. Feel good about it. The other one's a little more. The other two are a little more pervasive. One is what we call the monetization schemes, right? Where I'm always frustrating you, and there's certain people that are able to be patient and wait the next day to get something, and then there's another one where somebody found a dog dies. Great, it wasn't Fable 2, right? There's something where you have we have this like desire to get it now, right? And so what it ends up doing is it tends to monetize those who have the addictive gene. or like the impatient gene, right? I can't
Yeah.
wait. And it's not that many people. It's like 5 to 10%. It's kind of like having your own alcoholism gene, but you have this monetization gene. And some games were being financed that way, right? They were creating situations that were literally targeting kids that had that kind of a tendency where they just didn't have patience. And you can do this test in a schoolroom, with candy. It's
the marshmallow test.
Yeah, yes. So the marshmallow test, right? It's easy. So that's one that was being overused and used in play to win games, or even pray to win, or even in free to play models that were even healthy models that monetization had to be gotten rid of. The other one that's coming out that's new is kind of going back to what you were saying and what's in the question from Jordan. This idea of I can pique your curiosity brain, because your brain is attracted to something new. It's always attracted to it. It's like, and it's actually kind of like a different drug that goes through your brain that says, I just got stimulated. I got stimulated. One's stimulating your adrenaline factor, right? And the other's stimulating your curiosity thing. The other's preying upon your impatience, right? The one that takes your stimulation is kind of what a 5-second TikTok thing will do to me, right? I'll just be watching dogs jump around and watching dogs, and then an hour goes by and I didn't know what happened.
Oh, that rabbit was dangerous.
Yeah, and I didn't remember any of it. I don't remember anything I saw because your memory part of your brain doesn't start kicking in until about 15 seconds or 30 seconds, right? That you can actually remember it. And it probably doesn't really start working, and this is up for great scientific debate, we should do research on it, until you've watched it for 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's really creating what we consider to be a life-changing moment or something worth remembering, right? Like a thing. So these kind of responsibilities we need to, let's say, once we've identified that these are potential problems for our kids, we've identified these factors and we've researched them, we need to just account for them like anybody would, right? Like they did with cartoons for Pokemon when they were having children going into epileptic seizures, right? They start flashing lights, on your light. So if we identify these phenomena and we realize we need to start being responsible about it and not just saying, oh, we didn't do it, ignoring it. It's like the tobacco industry saying, cigarettes aren't addictive. We have to, if the sooner you start, admitting it, but because in the end, the problem really solves itself when you literally try to create memorable moments that are lasting, because it's more profitable in the long run. You're going to build communities that are going to start having these shared memories. These communities will be loyal and faithful, and they'll bring in more people, right? They will gather around something that helps them identify themselves with it, right? They're going to identify themselves with Pokemon because it is a healthy game world where you collect little bugs and put them in.
Yeah. I mean, Animal Crossing was great during COVID. I mean, I know a lot of people played that.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you a shared memory, and then, and the more I can be expressive in games and create my own animals or create my own things, which is what the NFT was proposing, right? In its healthy form, it really was proposing this. I could create these things, and I could share these creatures or give them to someone else as a gift. Now you're back in a generous, what I call virtuous cycle of content creation, where we're creating stuff that's generous in its basic nature. Now, I'm not trying to be moralistic here. You can check this out. It all makes money sense. Yeah. Just the way the human brain and the human communities work. Social mechanisms are about stories. You nailed that on the head when you asked the question at the beginning, and questions, as we know, are more important than answers. The right question is, why do we need more stories in the gaming environment or in the Web3 environment? Because that's what it's good at. That's what humans want.
Yeah.
They want real stories that are shared freely, and then they will share those stories with other people, shared freely in the sense where I'm telling it honestly, let's say.
Right, not looking for anything. It's kind of tied to the question that Vardis is asking. I think you've already touched on it, but the gamification of education, I think it would be to the couple last points you made.
Yeah.
And how would you think that works, and how can you be really effective at that?
I think that's something. That's a question we were talking about the other day when we met with Ariel. I think we were talking about that. Yeah. The first thing is to understand that education is not a teacher, telling you stuff to learn. It's not something education. If you think of, we need to redefine what education probably is and how it works. And then this thing that we talked about at the beginning with the war stories, that's education. People are sharing ways they solve problems. I don't know what's more educative than that. you know?
Yeah.
Rather than what we've done with education is we've made it a bunch of dates to memorize and a bunch of processes to lecturing and everything. And so the kids don't necessarily, some kids are really good at learning that. I would say about 15% of kids are really good and they'll get A's, and where everyone else gets, goes somewhere else in the bell curve of things, are really good at memorizing these dates and can do mathematical equations and things. But most human beings, what they're really good at is hearing someone's story and learning from it. And they can learn, if you go back to Aristotle and his Poetics, where he talks about the value of fiction, because there's nonfiction and fiction, right? Where, I don't know if you've read this before, but Socrates was really against fiction. He wanted to outlaw Homer and all that, because it was creating a group of sophists, and they were being manipulated by fear and by pity, and really get rid of it, or those who can't have a democracy. Whereas Aristotle just said, well, if you're sharing a real experience through fiction, and I don't have to kill my father or sleep with my mother to know that that's bad, then you've actually added value to my life, right? You've shared something that's tragic and horrifying, and my life experience is broader, right? That nails it on the head, right? So if we wanted to gamify education, I think we have to first educate educators as to the storytelling methods, and these methods aren't that strange, right? It's changing the way we talk about the curriculum, and rather than telling when Abraham Lincoln was born and when he died, we tell a story about Abraham Lincoln where he solved a problem, or where he did this, how he got elected, and then all of a sudden it becomes a little more relatable. The internet is good at that. The internet is really, really good at relaying stories, educative stories from one place to another. I think the one thing about Assassin's Creed, and we did all those Assassin's Creed games, Ubisoft, was that they were taking you into history when you were living stories in history. You can say it's not educative, they had trouble selling that, but it is. It gives you, at least it builds up curiosity, and maybe you'll go out there and look for facts that you can write your own stories because of that, and then you get to learn history, and you get that point of view from another time period. I think that's part of what games can do so well.
I agree. Yeah, I think Animal Crossing, they had a part of it was when you collected the animals from the ocean. You read about them and you got badges. My daughter knew a bunch of stuff about that. I was like, okay. And I think that's when it's not, if the story is strong and you have that, and somebody on the team really loves ocean and has a story to tell about it, the two tie very well together.
Yeah, I can tell you that a Monopoly is bad. I can tell you that, right?
Yeah.
Monopolies are bad. Or I can just play the game Monopoly, and by the end of it, there's only one winner and 6 losers that are all upset. I've basically shown you that monopolies are bad, right? Except for the one person that won, of course, because they're like really happy. Oh, monopolies are great, but everyone else lost, right? So games also have a procedural rhetoric in the way you play them, the way you learn from playing these simulations that tell a story. And Monopoly was actually originally called Landlords or something like that. It was called Anti-Monopoly for a while, and it was built by a woman. She designed this game. This woman designed this game to teach people the pitfalls of monopolies and capitalism. It was an educational game, Monopoly, to start with. Now it's just become a game where we kind of glorify the joy of becoming financially rich, and we get to pretend that we could be rich if we were just lucky through the right dice. Or that was not the original goal of the game, but the message is still hidden in it. This idea that monopolies are dangerous, and I think that's what you end up finding. If you have something to say, and this woman definitely had something to say, and she created one of the most popular games of all time, right? Was that if you have something to say, you'll figure out a way to say it. And if you give people a chance, you give them the right tools, you give them the right environment, you give them the right platform to express themselves and share their stories, let them educate you. Or what is it? Saint-Exupéry's little fox says, "Tame me."
Yes.
More, right? So if you give them a chance to tame you to them, right? We each tame each other, so to speak. Then you're going to go somewhere. You're going to build something. It may not be worth $1 billion, but it'll be worth something to someone, and it will definitely not be worthless. Because that's the thing I've been so surprised to see from all the speculation and things, is people have been creating some really worthless stuff, like worthless. But they've been doing it with such passion and energy that it makes it seem like this is a very complicated world we're living in. It's not complicated. It's just a question of saying, yeah, our world puts value, and its financial value as well, on stuff that brings people together.
Yeah.
That's it.
And on that note, I'm going to ask you a couple questions because we're pretty much at the end of our time. I'm going to start where we began. What is your first memory of a game you played?
That's a good question. I have two, but I'm going to give you. Candyland was one I played way back in the day. It's an old game, and I remember playing Candyland as a little kid. But I remember playing chess with my dad. My dad taught me chess when I was like 4. It was like I was so proud to be able to learn the rules of chess, and Dad was so proud about that. And he totally like would not let me win. Like he beat me every time he played me to teach me. And then I finally beat him when I was 13, and I was on the chess club, and I was, in high school and everything. And I was so happy. I was dancing around, and he didn't play me again until I was like 17 or 18. He wanted to teach me a lesson of how to be a good winner, I guess. But I remember that I remember sitting. I remember the table. I remember where we were playing. I remember me being, on the floor and him being on the couch and a table between us. And I remember him putting the piece. It's so clear to me in my mind, that first game. And I think it was being with Dad and doing something with Dad that made it so real to me. And when you say that, that's like the first memory that like thrones over me. I played some card games with my grandmother. She taught me how to play cards when I was about the same age, or at least 5 or 6, because that was such a big deal for like every card game you can imagine.
Yeah.
You remember what is the first game you played? Did you play one?
It was chess with my dad. Wow. I never played with after. I didn't want to play with him after I beat him up. Like, I'm good.
That's so cool. We have that in common now. We just shared a double whammy there, chess and our first memory of that.
And if you were to recommend your top 3 storytellers, would it be music, books, or in your industry, who would they be?
Who would be what?
Who would you recommend as the top 3 storytellers? And you can choose music, books, whoever.
I know this is going to sound really cheesy, but I think Taylor Swift's, she's a really good storyteller.
You're a Swiftie.
I'm a Swiftie, but I'm from her old stuff, the music the songs she was singing on. If I listen to Never Grow Up from Taylor Swift, I will cry every time I hear it. She has a form of empathy when she talks about her mom that I find absolutely fantastic, and her little brother and everything. And I get sucked into that song, and I know how hard it was to do. I think, and that would be one of my first storytellers. I'm a big fan as well of. Let's see, what would be the one that I have so many that I'm gonna drop around. I really liked the stories that were told in The Wire. I don't know if you've seen that TV series. Oh,
that's a great series. I was just talking about that the other day with Marcial. Yeah, it's a great series.
That team really blew me away because I was just absorbed by. And that's what it's an equivalent with Breaking Bad and with even the other stuff these guys have written. I found those stories to be absolutely breathtaking and confusing but absorbing and very powerful because they were giving a message that was very cut and dry. In terms of fantasy books and books, I'm trying to think of somebody that I like better because I read a lot. I do a lot of comic. I am a big fan of Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore. It'd be a toss up between those two comic book writers. I think. They're each different, but I find Sandman and some of the Neil Gaiman stuff to be really, really, really amazingly written. And Alan Moore is just an absolute genius. There's a generosity. He's a very grumpy old man, but he is so generous when he writes stuff. And I guess, those would be the 3 from now that come to mind. But if you gave me another 5 minutes, I'd probably come up with 3 more. Because I would, and I'll change my mind tomorrow. Just let you know, other than Taylor Swift, I'll stick to Taylor Swift for now. I really like the stuff she writes.
All right, perfect. And I guess there is one thing that Jordan really wanted me to ask you. Have you played any Web3 games or been on any Web3 apps that you really liked or have anything to say about?
I actually worked on the Darewise game. I guess you call that Web3, the Life Beyond. I had a lot of fun working on that. It was actually, we worked on it before it became a Web3 game. I think now it's got an NFT offering and it's been doing different things. But I worked on that game quite a bit. I've worked on games that haven't come out yet, so I probably can't even talk about them. So I'm not going to talk about them. I'm the ones that I like the most. Yeah, see, there's Web3 and there's Web3, right? There's there were some games called The Horde or Die Tonight. They were created by a company. There was one game where it was like a brawler game. You could just play and you just watch things happen. I quite like that. But the one, I think Life Beyond was interesting because at the beginning we were going out and saving planets and changing the biomes and fixing the biomes, and I really quite like that idea of giving me that opinion I could actually save Earth if I just rolled up my sleeve and did it. I've seen some amazing stuff in the works right now, so I'm very positive about the future of it. I've seen some. I'll say this: I really believe in it as a place where games are going to happen, but I don't know it as well because people usually come to me now for PC, console, and mobile. Pretty much all the time they come to see me for that. So, and I've got a workload that's it's usually pretty full, but I'm always open for adventures. You know, if somebody really, I'm pretty tough on my. I'm like that guy that asks a bunch of questions before I get involved in something because I want to make sure that the people in front of me really do want to make this world a better place and just are not in it just to get a bunch of money, whatever. So that's true for everything. That's not just for Web3. That's true for console, for anybody I work with. I try to understand what they want to say or what they want to do, what's their objective, what kind of world do they imagine this game bringing to the, you know, what's their metaphor, what's their context, what are they trying to say? And if they convince me that they're trying to say something and they've got a real, because I'm meeting a Spanish Web3 house that next week, who've done a lot of work, and someone convinced me that they're actually in it for the beauty of the thing, and so I'm going to go help them try to figure out what world goes with their universe. So I guess I don't know. I think the best games are still coming. I think the best Web3 games.
That's a great answer.
They haven't been made yet. But there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to compete with every other game on the planet. It just takes stuff like there's a thing on Assassin's Creed. I do have a Greek philosophy references. Yeah, I'm a huge Greek philosophy fan. He's talking about Assassin's Creed. It's true that the Florence game is actually quite educative, and that was one that was used quite well. But they actually go to Greece in one of the games too. And I have a couple of my writing friends. They worked on that game and they just loved it. Education is more about what you want to share.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be an authority. I think you just want to create places where people can go and figure it out for themselves. I find one thing about our medium is that the question is much more important than the answer. The setting up a debate where people learn to think and talk and can see different sides of the view of a question. Games are really good at that. Education today is not really good at that. We're good at telling you what's right and what's wrong and what's the right answer, what's the wrong answer, where I'd rather we set up situations where we get the students to try to figure out for themselves and develop critical thinking or develop, debates or dialectic, even just rather than the rhetoric, just have a world where people understand people understand what the word dialectic means, because not everyone does. And what's this idea of being able to come to an agreement together and discussion when two opposite truths are confronted one against the other, right? I think that's something that we've kind of forgotten how to do, and our education system needs to take that into account.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's a whole nother podcast. I will say that there is it's called Gamer Tree, and what the founder believes, his name is John, is that you don't need to ban gamers, but you need to match them. And so it's like a Tinder for gamers. So he's like, if you match the gamer who likes this game and they have a shared interest, they'll play the game together and they'll have a great time.
Yeah, that's not bad. It's like a play date kind of thing. I like that. It's a play date for adults, which is really cool. That's a cool idea, and it's definitely a service that people will certainly ask for, especially with all the game offerings that we have. We're doing. I think there's I'm trying to think how many it is. Is it 800 games just in France a year or something coming out? Like there's just tons of games coming out it might even be a month. There's just so many games coming out now that the idea of getting people to test games, play shorter games and not just one big game that takes 700 hours, except for Baldur's Gate 3, which is definitely worth a 300-hour playthrough. but the idea of saying that there's games that tell stories, and then I can take these stories that inspire me and I can go tell other stories. That's what I'm looking forward to. Because it's easy on Web3 platforms to share. That part nailed, right? That stuff you got down, right? What's difficult is to convince people that, or just to basically understand what is a game. What is it? What's its primary goal? It's not to get a bunch of people to play it. A game is to illustrate some memory, some experience that's real and truthful. It can be metaphorical and fictional, or it can be downright truthful, or whatever, or like fiction, nonfiction. But if you understand that's what games do best, then you should be in the business of creating games. If you're creating a platform that's going to attract game developers, then you need to understand what those game developers are, right? What are they trying to do? They're trying to express themselves, right? So they're trying to create shared experiences. So you can be the kind of agent of all these game people. And that's what most of the people that approach me have wanted me to do. But I'm like, okay, guys, I'd rather we build some tools now. Get us some tools so it's easier to make games. That's what Epic's done. That's what
they did a great job with that. Definitely.
Great job, and they're reaping the benefits of it right now. In outside of the game industry, right?
On the last note, would you bring up again when we talked about Web3 and the philosophers that you had referenced? Can you bring that name again, just before we close out?
The author, sure. Yeah. So one guy that was about. We didn't talk a little bit enough about him, but Stephen Denning used to work at the World Bank, and he transformed the communication, the storytelling around that money bank into a knowledge bank where people would share solutions to problems on a world development scale. I really recommend anything Stephen Denning's written, especially his first stuff on professional storytelling. And then John C.D. Brown, he's probably written books. He actually became, I think, one of the leaders at IBM for a while. I forget. But anyway, John C.D. Brown worked at Xerox, and anything he wrote about war stories and collective knowledge is definitely worth it. Hakim Bey is a philosopher on the Taz. His life is being scrutinized right now. He might actually, because he wrote something that was, he has some scandals that I'm not real sure about. But the work Taz was kind of the movement of the hackers movement for a while. It was considered one of these ideas we can create new utopias, new pirate utopias out there in the Web 3.0, and it's important to know who he was. I think the other person I would recommend. So Hakim Bey, the Taz, John C. Brown, same thing. There's another guy that's I think it's Pierre Levy. You might want to look up. Pierre Levy is another inspiration for me because he talked about collective knowledge and how he's a philosopher, a French philosopher, and he talks about basically he says something I find amazingly inspiring. The sum of all human knowledge is in the brains of living people.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's really important to understand that it's not what you find on some memory card somewhere or in a book or in a movie reel, whatever. That's our knowledge. Our knowledge is the sum of everything that are in people's brains. So if you really want to create a data bank or a knowledge bank or a game data bank or a community bank, just remember that the knowledge that's written on the website isn't really human knowledge. It's a digital copy of human knowledge. What's really important is getting people to have these memories in their heads because that's where the knowledge is. And this is kind of close out our cast here, whatever. The best way to encode human knowledge is in stories. We're just really good at encoding. It's a very efficient form of encoding knowledge. Yeah. Shared experience, a know-how, do-it-yourself, a memory of losing my dog. All these things are encoded. Stories are very efficient ways of encoding knowledge and shared experience. So in the end, I think Pierre Levy's another person that you might want to just check out. I've got tons of others. I'm an autodidact of reading and different things, but it all comes down to the idea. Games tomorrow are going to be sharing the knowledge in the brains, not sharing the knowledge in some database. The database will help you and facilitate that, and it can maybe help us remember what we said or see what we said or listen to what we said. But in the end, you're basically connecting brains. We're collecting brains together and letting them share their experiences. And once all of our brains are connected and we love each other, maybe we'll stop war. Maybe we'll save the planet. Maybe we'll do other stuff. That's my
creative.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay.
Is that a good answer, or did you?
That's a great answer. We definitely have to bring you back after you meet with this Web3 project to see where you are. So We'll do this
With
next year.
pleasure. With pleasure. Trying anytime. It's always
All
fun to talk about people that want to learn how to tell stories. I'm always ready for that.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, everyone, for joining.